everyone, and welcome to Inside LP. It's our live drop in, take a peek, see what's happening at Laughing Places. We report on the happenings of the Disney Company. I'm the co-founder of Laughing Place, Rebecca Mosley, and with me is our CEO, Benji Breitbart. Hey Ben, how's it going? What a day!
It's busy. Actually, we had our editorial meeting this morning, and it's the next couple days, at least Wednesday and Thursday, are a little nutso. Like a lot going on.
Yeah, we've got the premiere of Wakanda Forever. I know just around the corner. Today, we're going to be talking shortly about the Bob Chapek conversation with the Wall Street Journal. I actually was able to catch it as well.
Yeah, and so this was interesting because a lot of times when they do these panel conversations, we just get the audio because they're selling. It's usually like Citibank or something, and they're just doing the audio for regulatory reasons. But this time, man, they were in Laguna with the ocean behind them.
Beautiful.
I mean,
multi-camera.
Chapek has to leave that to go to the premiere of Wakanda Forever, which is how actually the editor-in-chief of of Wall Street Journal started it by basically saying, okay, well, can you tell us everything that happens in Wakanda Forever and all that? But it's funny because Bob responded, and they asked about going to premiere. He's like, do you get tired of it? He goes like, I've been to so many that they just kind of seem to happen one after the other. And, you go from the next one, which I think we get as people who cover them. It's like, okay, which premiere are we covering tonight? But, in the end, for the people who made the movie, he says it's a culmination of 5 years of work. So you really got to remember to honor that and respect all the work and effort they put into it. So I think that was a nice moment because, I think when you're in the CEO of a Walt Disney Company, when you're opening up rides and movies and TV shows every day, it's not every day. It's every day for you, but it's not every day for the folks that created it. And to have a moment to honor their work, and hard work over the last several years is pretty cool.
I also found it just insightful as to kind of Chapek's thought processes in general, because he has a tendency to feel a little distant. And that moment felt personal, and I'm not used to that kind of dialogue from him. He tends to be a bit distant. I don't want to say offstandish, but a bit distant. So
yeah, and we'll get into that in a little bit too, because I think he gave some insight into how he views his role at Disney, which is different than obviously Michael Eisner did, and I would say Bob Chapek as well. So, but they started talking about what makes Disney special. And that was one thing that Bob kept going back to, is the history and heritage. I mean, it's almost a joke that, if you see Bob Chapek and he doesn't mention the 100th anniversary, like that something is terribly wrong and you should go to the nearest emergency exit. But, he mentioned that less than 1/100% of companies can say they've been around 100 years. Wall Street Journal happens to be another one, which is ironically owned by News Corp, which has the common ownership of 21st Century Fox that Disney acquired. So they don't own Wall Street Journal, but they're in many ways kissing cousins in some ways, because they both, Disney has assets that used to be connected to the Wall Street Journal. But and you basically talked about how no matter what happens, and Bob Chapek has obviously led a lot of change, particularly discussing how there's no sacred cows, right? Like you're willing to, do anything that is that Disney needs to happen. But he says the one thing that will stay the same at the heart is Disney storytelling, and their focus on brands and franchises will not change. And I wish he would never. I mean, franchise is one thing. I wish they would just excise the term brand from the Disney lexicon, because to me, branding is something you do to cattle to tell because they all look alike, to make sure you know which one's yours. It's like, or you put on Tide to know that that's Tide detergent versus no branded detergent. It's all the same. And so I hate that term. Disney actually stopped using it during the Save Disney era, because they put out an ad and they got flogged for it, because it was like, you're not the world's most respected entertainment brand. Like, no one views you as a brand; they view you as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Chapek talked a little bit about that, how there's this disconnect because people are so passionate about Disney. they view it as not a company, but as a lifestyle, right? And that sometimes when Disney has to do things that companies do, raise prices, focus on their shareholders, which is what they have a fiduciary responsibility to do, it can cause some conflicts. Now, some would say, um, hey Gio, some would say, that's why your job is hard and you get paid hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. But that is a struggle that Disney has. Right now when they're talking Wall Street Journal, it's a different audience than D23 Expo,
Correct.
and
Mhm.
they talked about how that because people view Disney as one not a company. Disney fans aren't looking at org structures. Now, if you're watching this video and you're a fan of Laughing Place, you probably do think about org structures because we covered. But they just view it as Disney, and so he kind of pat himself on the back for taking a company from 5 silos to 2, and then talked a lot about how they're going to try and combine the 2 remaining, the physical world, products and parks essentially, and the media world, stuff you're watching through a television or a movie screen, and try and give that. Now, Wall Street Journal kept trying to figure out what that meant, and Bob Chapek did not. He gave a lame example because I think he didn't want to reveal what it is. Like, oh, you ride Pirates of the Caribbean, and then you go home, and maybe Disney Plus will say, hey, here's some Pirates of the Caribbean content, which they've been talking about since Michael Eisner. I remember, creating relationship magic. So, but I think there's probably more to that. They just don't want to kind of play out their hand quite yet. He did mention they're not looking at doing like an Amazon Prime for Disney, but that they're just trying to build the relationship people have with Disney.
But but let me ask you from the consumer side, because you're both somebody who's deeply interested in this organizational business element, but you're also a Disney fan and you have certain expectations. I know that about you. Do you think would you argue to support this notion that Chapek has decided of narrowing the silos, or do you think that there was a benefit to the Disney company in kind of having their product lines more, their businesses a bit more fractured as far as organizational structure?
I think that the thing that changed is storytelling has become more integrated. Whether you're talking about Cars Land or Galaxy's Edge or even Avengers Campus, people want to have more immersive experiences, which is not the same as as it was 15, 20 years ago. Also, people are more engaged now in those storytelling brands. I mean, if you watch the season finale of She-Hulk, that thing was, a whole plot point is some producer that, like most 20 years ago, no one would know what Kevin would be like an in-joke. And now everyone knows who Kevin Feige is, which is weird. And, it's not weird anymore, but we didn't think about who produced Tron. We just thought it was like a Disney movie. We didn't think about, any of those things, unless you're watching like a Disney Channel behind the scenes feature or something. But like most people, everyone knows Kevin Feige. Like you can be a casual fan and who Kevin Feige is. And so I think, that's changed. So there's some, if the creatives have a thing to say, hey, if you go to the park and do the bounty hunter experience, maybe that changes the ending you get on something, or we have a special video, a special bonus episode of Mandalorian or something, that's, I think that would be kind of cool. I don't know what it's going to look like. And I don't know if it's worth it economically, but I think there could be benefits to having, storytelling benefits if the storytellers see a benefit in it.
And as a Disney fan of many decades now, because I have a few years on you, I am so skeptical whenever they want to talk to me about personalization or whatever, having been through the hype of Indiana Jones adventure at Disneyland and then experiencing it, of what happened with the My Disney experience at Walt Disney World, and then kind of what's happened. And then even just most recently with the way that Galaxy's Edge was initially described and pitched to us as consumers, and then the realities of what we have. So now when I hear Chapek with these really grand notions, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'll wait. I'm really a wait and see position now.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. You're asking, yeah, would I think it's cool if they could? Yeah, but I don't think it's going to happen. And it's interesting. He talked about, they asked about the metaverse. He's like, oh, we don't use that term. First term I came out of his mouth when he talked about the theme park metaverse on CNBC, and now they're using next generation storytelling to describe this thing. But I don't. I think it was something that they did because it was a buzzword and they felt they needed to kind of hedge their bets because they didn't want to be caught flat footed. But then I think, even Facebook, which literally changed their name to Meta, is now stepping back from the metaverse, whatever the heck that was going to be, just because, it's one of those things where it's like, it will happen, but it will happen naturally on its own thing. And kind of like how video calling, like my whole time as a kid, everyone's like, oh, everyone's gonna have video phones. Nobody had it until like it became just a Facebook thing and you could move around with your phone because there was really no advantage to seeing you talk. Like now it's using it to, see what you're saying. And people don't use it. Still 99% of the time don't use it. In fact, they've regressed. Now they send text messages like a telegraph because that's what people want to do.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for stopping by. One of the other phrases that popped up in this discussion, Ben, was when he was talking about their international strategies, because he was talking about the streaming. They were talking about streaming services and content generation for these streaming services, the feed the beast idea. But Chapek specifically talked about the Disney company's efforts as far as being strategically consistent and tactically divergent. And this is in regards to the way that they have set up kind of brain trusts. That's my word, in global environments, so that you have Indian artists creating programming for the Indian audiences and these types of things. What were some of your takeaways when they got into that element of the discussion?
Well, and it's interesting because there's some countries have regulatory reasons. Like if you want to be in, some European countries, you have to have local content or they won't let you have a streaming service. So, I think you look at something like Squid Games, obviously not Disney, but you have something that could cross over if it's of high quality. And in fact, there's been some things on Hulu from the UK now that you don't have a language barrier that have done really well. The name's escaping me, but there was a sort of like a interpersonal drama series that did well on Hulu from the UK. So I think it makes sense if you're going to be, if you're going to be in Disney Plus in India. And it's not too different than what they did with Disney Channel back in the day, where you had Violetta and you had Indian, you had was it like Chinese High School Musical, and you had other things that are local. So I think it's just there's more content, so you're going to create more of it, so you're going to need more people. But I think it's good, and maybe something will cross over, and that'd be great, But if it doesn't have to, as long as it caters to its local market.
And as part of this conversation, Chapek kept referring to the elasticity of the Disney brand and how the audience seems to be more savvy to the notion of what Disney may mean in one area versus in another area. And it caused me to question. I know there's been a lot of talk about the possibility of maybe folding in Hulu so that you don't have the same differentiation. I'll be honest, I don't like that as a parent. I very much like the fact that Pam and Tommy was on Hulu, not Disney Plus. But I'm wondering, what do you kind of see as the future in that?
It's going to happen. It's just, it's happened everywhere except the United States, right? And and there's parental controls. It's not even like it's there, right? Like if you are not authorized, you don't even see it exists. It's not like you can't press play on it. It just doesn't even exist. So like for the Marvel tile, if you're not, if you haven't engaged your passcode, which I just about told you what it was, you don't even know Deadpool exists.
Okay.
So we can debate all we want, and I don't know that you're ever going to come to a right answer about what where should it be. But I think the enlightening thing to Disney and to me is most Disney Plus subscribers do not have children.
That is true. And Gio also points out the notion of gated. And I have not dived deep into the parental controls because it's funny that most Disney Plus households don't have kids because I do have a kid and my kid does not watch a lot of Disney Plus. So he tends to watch it with us. Otherwise he's watching other sources. So I
Well,
don't
and you know, it's I you know, they're not doing this blindly, you know, since it's out, you know, in Canada, for example, you know, they've seen the reaction already. And I think that's what's causing them to say it can be elastic, is they say, you know, it's, you know, Disney has continuously pushed what Disney can do. I mean, there's things like Night Before Christmas, which are now Disney, that used to be Touchstone. And I think, you know, especially now that everyone understands of Disney as a corporation, um, you know, I think people more nuanced, you know, understand. I mean, there used to be a time when you'd be like, "What? Disney owns ABC?" Like they would be shocked. And like now, everyone knows Disney owns
right.
ABC, and
Hmm.
you know, like they're not thinking about. I mean, I mean, you know, I don't know if you saw the recent She-Hulk, where like
Hmm.
she walks across, you know, this past the Seven Dwarfs,
Yep.
where you know, Reboot, where they keep talking about how they get discounts at Disneyland, um, on which is Hulu, and decidedly not a family show. Um, from the creators of Modern Family, a family show. Um, but
But this is
um,
clearly not a broadcast television family show.
right,
Very clearly. Reboot.
yeah. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's
No,
not for all eyes or
no,
ears.
no. No,
Um,
no. It is quite mature.
but you know, I think they're looking at the elasticity of, you know, I mean, he said it. They've been more precious about what they think Disney can't do than what they think the consumers think Disney can't do. And same thing comes with ESPN and sports betting. You know, they oh, we're gonna stay far away from it. But as it becomes a necessary part of the business, and as the culture has changed around sports betting, you know, there's a difference between taking the bet and talking about the bet. And I think there's the same thing between, you know, a Disney Junior profile and a regular Disney Plus profile, and a Disney Plus profile with, you know, no age restrictions. Um, I don't know, you know, in hindsight, maybe Disney Plus wasn't the right word for it, but you know, I think it's inevitable that actually that we're going to look at a Disney bundle as the thing. I mean, it's called the Disney bundle, right? Like it's not even the Hulu bundle; it's the Disney bundle. It's you have Disney, you have Hulu, and ESPN all together. And some things, I mean, and National Geographic is straddling that because some things Nat Geo are super. I mean, there's Nat Geo Kids. You have shows like Weird but True caters to them. You have shows that can cater to everybody, like you know. Supernatural or Limitless or Jeff Goldblum, and then you have decidedly adult things because they deal with war and complex things like the 9/11 documentary series they had, and some other things that it it's complicated, and but they're able to do it. You just got to be nuanced about it, and they'll mess up, and they'll, you know, sometimes they'll be too safe, sometimes they'll be too brave, but you know, you got to. It's one thing Bob seems to talk about is he's willing to balance, you know, and there's a lot of things that need to be balanced at a company like Disney.
Yeah, he kept using the phrase. I want to say it was marketplace demand or something along those lines that made it very clear that it is he was trying to present the idea that there isn't so much an ideology as a desire to appeal to a consumer base. We want to make a product that people want. Seemed what was my takeaway the language he was using. Not while he used the phrase "we need to follow our North Star," he used North Star is as the equivalent of good storytelling, not necessarily an ideology. And so I found that very intriguing. But I'll
Well, I
wait
mean,
for your thoughts.
I mean, I don't think Disney. I mean, Disney doesn't want in a world where everyone has ideologies about everything. I don't think Disney wants to have an ideology outside of making good product. You know, I don't think they want to. I mean, well, you have your own values; those can, when you have a collection of people, those can differ. You know, but I think the values that were always taught when I worked there was you had, you know, storytelling, you know, cast and guest focus, and that was it. You know, I don't know that Disney wants to have, because everything can become political, and
Mhm.
I think Disney, despite the fact it's forced to at times, would prefer not to get involved in anything ideological.
One of the questions that took a turn that I did not expect at all was when Chapek was asked about external content. And it's interesting because I noticed in our live blog, were you live blogging this
Yeah.
or okay, you went the same place I did because Chapek was talking about how the goal is to have all of their content self-created. And we're actually going to be talking soon about a acquisition in a way because we're seeing Doctor Who in the future will be coming to Disney Plus, and so I was expecting this to be a moment for Chapek to kind of discuss the wonders that is the Disney company of self-created content, but then also bringing in these well-respected, loved, worlds from other corporations. And no, there was no mention of it.
I think it's interesting to me too because the number one thing consistently on Disney Plus is Bluey, not
Mhm.
self-created. So I was surprised she took such a hard line on it. It's like as opposed to like, oh well, we want the most of it to be self-created, but we'll look at opportunities, which is like the truth. I don't know why he went so hard line on no, we'll just make everything ourselves when that's not the truth. Um, and in so much that it's like they announced it yesterday. So I don't get it.
Do we
What's this thing? Does Disney no longer want to have the family ideology, however they define that?
I think in answering this, Chapek kind of summed it up by saying that they want to reflect the diverse world they live in, that they want their content creators to be able to express their realities. And so, as far as ideology, that seemed to be the language that he kept going to, was that we want to reflect the diversity of our own creatives.
Right, it's not, but the diversity. There's a difference between diversity and family. I think political people try and conflate them, but they're not. Is Yeah, I think Disney absolutely wants to have diversity, and Disney also wants to have family, but as defined in the broadest sense of the term, and place where you can engage with other members of your family, not maybe all the people at all the time, but and sometimes it's everybody in the family, sometimes it's just your significant other, sometimes it's just your found family. But I think they do want to be a place where people can enjoy things together, with their families.
Do
But
we
I
want
don't
to
know.
bring in Luke to talk a little bit about before we move on and finish up with talking about parks, or do we want to continue with this first, Ben?
No, we can bring Luke on since we talked about Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So why is Doctor Who Luke? You're British.
I am British. Thank you.
So why? So tell us, educate us. Why is Doctor Who so forgettable that Bob Chapek cannot remember that Disney acquired it for 24 hours?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, I mean, Doctor Who is not forgettable, and that's coming from me, a person who genuinely really loves the show.
I can almost
Uh,
guarantee you've seen a bazillion times more episodes than Bob Chapek have.
oh, absolutely, hundred.
Right?
I have zero doubt in my mind on that.
What is it about Doctor Who? Okay, I know that you're a Disney fan. I've
Mhm.
I've seen your article. You write for Laughing Place. A lot of your stuff is kind of top 10 list, letting us know those attractions that you love. So I have a general idea of the kind of stuff you like. I'm curious what it is about Doctor Who that you like. What is it that brings you to Doctor Who?
Well, Doctor Who, I have my personal journey with the show began shortly after it came back from a 16-year hiatus in 2005, and it's been running pretty much consistently ever since. But there is there has been no show created in the history of the world, as far as I'm concerned, that can really just do anything. There is no, there is absolutely no restrictions to where, because obviously the Doctor is a time traveler, and the Doctor can regenerate, so the Doctor can become any person. So we've seen now that the Doctor has been, for the first time, a woman, and now from this, the Doctor will for the first time be a black man, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of those things that it's been a show that's always kind of like fought against social issues and that sort of thing and putting it into a science fiction kind of twist. But there's just a genuine feeling for the show, and I think it was pretty perfectly encapsulated in the special that we had this past weekend, which was the last story for Jodie Whittaker in the current era of the show. And that show just it was part of the celebration of the BBC's 100th anniversary. So it kind of delved into a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of what makes the show important. And the show is written by fans. Most of the people that have written for it, and especially the four showrunners that we've had for the show, grew up as fans and love the show and know just as much about it as anyone else. So it's just a show that has so much love put into it and has been on for 60 years. I mean, next year will be 60 years.
Huh? What's up?
I had food poisoning over the weekend, so I ended up binge watching the first season of this is it considered a reboot because it had this long term, or is it just considered a continuation?
A little bit of both, because I mean,
Okay.
when it came back in 2005, it came back with a whole new style. It was produced in a modern way and kind of inspired at the time by like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and shows of the 1990s in that 45-minute format. Back in when the show ran from 1963 until 1989, it was more of a serialized show. And the production values were never as good, and especially towards the end of its time, the BBC really didn't care about the show, which is why it ended up getting cancelled in 1989. They tried to bring it back as an American co-production with Fox in 1996, and that ended up giving us a TV movie. But while that was popular in England, it wasn't popular in America. So that never went through. So then it took another 9 years before we ended up getting the reboot, which is a continuation, but also a reboot.
Now, as a Disney fan, with it coming to Disney Plus,
Mm-hmm.
do you hope now that you'll end up seeing Doctor Who represented within Disney parks or some way within Disney, hotels or something more tangible?
Yeah.
Cruise, what?
Well, I mean, seeing this news yesterday, I had seen the rumor about it, but I'm like, wow, this is insane, because this is literally my two passions joining together, which I think is so perfect. And one of the criticisms of the most recent era of the show was the lack of advertising and kind of the lack of content, because we only got a few episodes over the course of the last few years. So what I'm really excited for is what the show will be able to do from here, especially with the backing of Disney and the advertising backing of Disney as well. I think the show will be able to go to some new heights, and maybe we'll get some spin-off series too. That's another thing that people have been very very interested about, because Doctor Who has had a couple of spin-off series. When the show first came back in 2005, when it was helmed by Russell T Davies, who is also the man taking over the show again now, which was another moment where people were like, well, I did not expect this to be happening. Never expected him to come back as showrunner. And his time during the show was arguably the most popular time the show has ever had. And while it's still been popular since with Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi, and Jodie Whittaker, it hasn't quite hit the heights that it did when David Tennant was the Doctor. And I think part of that is why they're bringing him back, at least temporarily, as a way to celebrate the show and also to draw people in.
Now, Gio points out that it did air for a short while during the Tennant years on Disney XD. I don't recall this. Do you guys recall this?
I
remember seeing the news about it, but I never actually watched any of it on Disney XD.
Yeah. So does this now? So David Tennant's now going to be on Disney Plus as Doctor Who. He has already been the Purple Man in Marvel, and
Mm-hmm.
probably most famously Scrooge McDuck. Um, he's on his way to being, future Disney legend, FDL status, right?
And if this Doctor Who thing goes through pretty well with Disney, then I think that's a very distinct possibility. And I actually got to see David Tennant a couple of years ago. They did the Disney Channel Fan Fest at Disneyland, and they had a DuckTales Q&A panel. And David Tennant drove down Main Street with some of the other cast, and that was a highlight of my life.
So I want to go inside LP a little bit. First of all, I do have to ask: do you always wear shirts that match the walls?
No, but I don't always think about it.
So we got this email from someone at Disney Branded Television yesterday, and goes, "Thanks so much for. Just wanted to reach out. Thanks so much, Benji, for all the wonderful Doctor Who coverage. We really look forward to working with you on this show, and we look forward to brainstorming new content ideas." So, Luke, you're going to be busy.
I'm happy for it.
So, what? So Doctor Who's one of those things where I felt like I never got to get into it because I was too busy with the Disney things. And then, so it was like everyone I knew loved it, but I just never was like, I can't start. I don't have time. So I have two questions for you. One is if I'm trying to get into it, where do I start without being, having to commit to like thousands of episodes of television viewing?
I think there's either two ways, and it kind of just depends on how dedicated you are. I think the best way to start is with any new era. So if you start with, I would not go anywhere near the classic series unless you become obsessed with the new series, because the classic series is just there's a lot more to it, and it's a lot harder to digest. But I would start, if you want to begin the journey, I would start with series 1, episode 1, the very first story with Christopher Eccleston, because as a soft reboot of the show, it kind of told you all the basics that you needed to know in a very easy and digestible way, so that people immediately understood what the show was. But then you could also start with the Matt Smith era too, because when Matt Smith took over, it had a new showrunner, Stephen Moffat, and that was kind of an even softer reboot. So it still kind of explains everything that happens, explains the basics of the show, just in a less new way. The other way you could do is, and this is something I probably will be working on creating an article at some point, is just going through some of the most important episodes that kind of show what the show is all about. So, an episode that perhaps shows off a regeneration, so you can see what that is like. Maybe a Doctor's introductory episode, because we've had 4 or 5 different Doctors now, each with their own first episode, and some of them are better at introducing that new Doctor than the other. I think the very best introduction to a Doctor that we've got in the new series has been with Matt Smith. His very first episode was just a masterclass in how to introduce a Doctor. So, and then a Dalek episode, a Cyberman episode, an episode with the Master, who is kind of the Doctor's Moriarty, his arch nemesis. So, I'll be working on that list at some point.
And if you want to learn a little bit more about Disney and Doctor Who unexpected references, Luke crafted an article for us back in February. So seeing into the future that Disney and Doctor Who would have a tighter partnership. We've got that available on Laughing Place. I see Kyle put a link in the comments on the side. We'll be sure to include a link below as well. I know for me, watching this season 1, I think it was the first episode of David Tennant as Doctor, but I'm not sure. It may have been one of his earliest episodes. He ends up reciting the lyrics of The Lion King.
That's it. Yeah, that's his very first episode.
Okay, it was his very first. Okay, and I was just like, oh no way, that's hysterical. So yeah, it was a show I tried to watch in college and could not. My friends were most of my social base was very passionate about it, and I tried to join them a couple of times to watch it, and I couldn't consume it. But watching the Eccleston series, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to David Tennant because I know for a lot of people that he kind of is like that pinnacle. So I'm excited for what's ahead.
Yeah, and definitely don't, because a lot of people become infatuated with David Tennant, and a lot of people gave up the show afterwards.
Aw.
Or at least, from what I've seen. Don't rub it off, because every actor that has played the Doctor, going back to the classic era through to Jodie Whittaker, has been incredible, and they have never had a bad Doctor. They all have different interpretations of how to play the role, but each of them have done it. They've always picked the perfect person for the perfect time.
They what one thing that I think is fascinating to me and is that there's so much overlap in the same way that there was Disney Star Wars overlap, Disney comics overlap, Marvel, whatever. There's so many Disney fans are also Doctor Who fans. What do you think speaks to both? Like, what do you think? What is there? We talked a little bit about, but like, what at the core? I mean, is it optimistic? Is it just the expansive storytelling? What
I
draws?
think it's a little bit of both. I think the optimism is a strong part of it for me, because the Doctor is someone that stands for all that is right, and there's a quote from, and I'm trying to get it right in my head, but from the Peter Capaldi's Doctor. Love is always. I'll look it up so I don't get it wrong. But there's something about it, and being a Disney fan, my Disney fandom kind of goes back to like classic and even like 1990s Epcot. So a lot of that has very similar like musical vibes and optimistic vibes. So I've always been into like the science fiction kind of thing, and I think Doctor Who is a family show. Like there's definitely moments where it gets dark and scary, but no more than say Marvel or Star Wars. So I think that it's a pretty perfect pairing.
Well, thanks, Luke. We look forward to a lot more Doctor Who talk with you in the next year.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really excited to be dealing with Doctor Who, and this is something I didn't think I'd be getting to do with Disney. So hopefully we get. I'm just upset that 13 months is a long time to wait for new Doctor Who. That's a long time.
And Gio and Kyle are both coming in with some of their favorite or their doctors, discussing the companions as well, an element of the show that I'm sure we will all learn more about when it arrives on Disney Plus, and Benji finally watches it because it is under the Disney umbrella, and therefore he is compelled to.
And
I stuck through Selfie, so I stick through Doctor Who.
Kyle mentioned that there is a classic Doctor Who channel on Pluto TV. The current series is also on HBO Max if anyone happens to have that. So if you
That's where I've been watching
if you want to catch up ahead of time, because 13 months is a while to wait, then you do have those options.
There you go.
Well, thanks, Luke.
Of course. Thank you.
So next, I want to talk about Disney. ESPN has officially sold the majority of the X Games to a venture capital firm, and most people won't care, but I gotta share. X Games was my first Disney job, except I volunteered, so I don't know if it counts as a job. But I went to my local Taco Bell, and they had a flyer asking for people to volunteer to work the X Games, and I was like, "Oh, that's Disney." I think I was still in high school. It was over summer in San Francisco. You signed up. I had never seen the X Games. I didn't know who Travis Pastrana or Tony Hawk were. They kept talking about the 380 that Tony Hawk got or whatever, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I definitely didn't fit in with the sort of skater um, vibe because I was not that cool. But um, they put me in because I was willing to work like so many days. I was like considered like an Excel volunteer or something like that, and
Uh-huh.
I think it meant I got like a nicer goodie bag. But so I show up and I don't know what I was going to be doing, and they put me on crowd control, and I had never worked a day of crowd control in my life because I was 17, and okay, yes, 9-8. Thank you, Kai. Exactly, proving my point. And while I knew nothing about the X Games, I was able to show that I knew something about crowd control. I don't know where. I don't know why I knew anything about it. I don't know, but I would just look at the situation and I could figure out what to do. And I don't know that it gave me the confidence to then apply at Disney because I thought I was too stupid to work at Disney and I didn't think they would hire me. So once I did that, I was like, and something about working with the team and being appreciated and all that. So I don't know where my Disney life would be if I didn't work for the volunteer at the X Games.
That's awesome.
Um, and every once in a while, I look up the volunteer coordinator who is like a producer for the X Games. I don't know what how this affects her, but still there, and
Wow.
won't ever remember me. But like after it was all said and done, like she took like her 4 favorite volunteers like out to dinner, and I was like, they're giving me free food. Like this is awesome.
Oh, that's amazing. I forgot. If I knew that, I forgot that that was kind of like your doorway to the Disney career that you had was X Games volunteer.
Yeah, well, and I always said like what I used to tell people was like when I would try and talk about all the different things, I would always include it just so I could knock off the media networks branch.
Yeah,
I was like, oh
totally.
yeah, no, like I work for media networks, like crowd control at X Games, but I did it. Um,
Was there any
Javier
was
wants.
there
I'm
anything
sorry,
left?
Bob. He wants to know about Bob Chapek mentioned the Epcot transformation. No, in fact, he when asked about like expanding the parks, Bob Chapek was notably silent. Um,
I was going to say, was there anything left in the Wall Street Journal discussion that we didn't touch on? Because I know we cut off a little early to talk to Luke in light of the Doctor Who, but we mentioned earlier a little bit about the Disney parks was because that's kind of the wrap up of his discussion was much more Disney.
Well, I think really the only thing I kind of mentioned was he had some quotes that I think engaged how he deals with Disney fans. I mean, like for example, he talked about how if they move a churro cart 10 feet, you know, it's a big deal to Disney fans, which is not untrue. But and that he doesn't care how people view him because he knows he has to make business decisions and that those won't always be reflected well in the fan community. And particularly the yield management, basically the raising of prices because of the demand at the parks. And so, as long as they like Disney, I don't care what they think about me. Um, Now, what discouraged me was that when you have if you have a supply and demand issue, you can always increase the supply. And there was no mention of that. In fact, he kind of
Mhm.
deflected a question that was asked by the Wall Street Journal about, do you think of expanding the parks business? He kind of said, oh, well, we love the parks and all that, without saying, yeah, we're going to expand the parks. So it that to me that was a little discouraging because I understand it's hard to be liked when everyone's micromanaged. Everyone's looking at every decision and either blaming you or giving you credit, and usually the internet's not on the credit giving side. Um, but you know, giving up on wanting to be liked is a little discouraging, and
And
also not committing to solving the problem in the way we all want it solved is also a little discouraging.
what what I came away from it was the reminder that he had been with Parks and Resorts for 7 years, and his comment that the majority of the correspondences that he received were regarding guest cast interactions, and his his dialogue at that time really supported that he values the notion that while attractions are great and experiences are great, the service that you're giving to your customer with your guest and cast interactions is what people is he kept using this phrase, making magical memories that last a lifetime. And he really seemed to bring it back to those encounters, that it's much more about that is at the brand. That rhetoric from him is not something that I have been familiar with from him, and it kind of struck me.
There's some things that Bob Chapek has passions for that have been pretty clear. For example, his dedication to Make-A-Wish is
Mhm.
unquestioned. His love of guest letters that talk about cast is unquestioned. His desire to reevaluate every part of a business is unquestioned. But I think it's clear watching him and listening to him talk that he's much better in a one-on-one cast to guest experience, a guest or even Bob to cast experience or what have you, than he is doing this kind of thing. And you don't want to. Yeah, I think there's value in it being able to have an introvert be the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, but you need to compensate in other ways. And I think he's trying. I think he's doing a lot of outreach. It's a hard time to be CEO because everyone has opinion about everything. But it'll be interesting to see. I think what he talked about this fourth quarter, which we just ended, being sort of the first normal quarter. And for Disney under his, so we're trying to see Disney be the Disney and Bob Chapek's image. And I think we can gauge how we feel about it. I mean, I think he doesn't get enough credit for the fact that he was head of parks when they had Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, Avengers Campus, Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway. These attractions that were, I would like to say are universally loved, at least in some components. So, he's proven that they can deliver at the parks. I don't think there's bad experience. We don't have a stinker anymore.
Well, I'm still reserving judgment on that. I'm very interested to see how the client base, the consumer base is, and not your passionate, I go all the time fans, but the people who had been planning to go and had to delay it because of COVID or that kind of thing. And now they're going and they're experiencing it within this realm of the park reservation, the Disney World. Because as I noticed during my trip, that a lot of people, because you have this park reservation requirement, have an expectation of reduced crowds that aren't being realized. And I don't know what their I'm not here to define what the reasonable expectations should be. I'm just saying that I know that they're going to the park thinking I had to make a reservation. So therefore, all those stories I used to hear about how there's lines everywhere, well, that's not going to be my experience. I'm going to encounter some lines, but and that wasn't what our experience was.
I think it's interesting is if the park is sold out, by definition, there's less people because there's reservations. So it might not be as less as people are expecting, and it probably isn't based on my experience at Disneyland last Saturday. It was miserable. And, I don't know what metric they're using to judge good guest experience. I mean, I know what Disney used to use, and those things don't make sense in a Genie Plus reservation world. And so how do we know? Is it just exit surveys? Is it feel? I mean, how do they know that it's a good guest experience? Because the parks are not, I think you could sell reservations easier if the parks were comfortable. I'm not saying dead, or even not busy, but just comfortable. But when you show up, then and it's just downright busy. And even if it's less busy than it would have been without it, I mean, I presume that if the parks were, if they say no reservations, there were some guests that got turned away, then it's still maybe not enough. And it shows you that prices are probably going to go up again because it's still too busy, and that somehow they're creating demand. All these people, oh, well, I'm not going to go to the parks anymore. Well, you're still there because it's still busy. Maybe not you, but someone backfilled you who's paying more. And so as a business, if you're saying it's still overcrowded, that's not a good thing for Disney, or it's not a good thing for Disney fans, which is why there needs to be more Disney to absorb these additional crowds. Because as long as the parks are busy and full, then they're going to raise prices because that's how supply and demand works. And so, sometimes we get things where it's like, oh, it's too busy, I'm not going to go. I'm going to show it to Disney that I'm not going to go. That's what they expect. They expect to get less guests to go when they raise prices. But they also know that there's more people that want to go than can, in terms of capacity. So
Gio raises a question that I've had, Ben, and that is, does the Resi system to some extent increase demand in that it creates a FOMO? It creates kind of this, almost limited edition notion to your product.
Maybe, but then that makes it even more of a no-brainer, right? Like if you're going to create, there's no business reason to not have the reservation system. And so therefore, yeah, maybe. And, how are they determining what the park capacity is for the reservations? Every time they open up a new experience, whether it's a new restaurant or something, that effectively raises the capacity. But it doesn't mean that you're all still going to be able to ride Haunted Mansion Holiday conveniently, because it might not be as something that's in demand. Capacity and capacity of things that are popular are not the same thing.
And that's why I'm very interested. Yeah, no, I'm very interested to see kind of where the metrics end up as we kind of have a period of time, because I was willing to give them a chance to kind of gauge and work the system, because like one of the things that I feel happened, but I can't prove happened, was that we had several wait times that were posted one thing and then ended up being much longer. And I don't think it was due to the attraction operating poorly or anything like that. I wondered if it was the ratio of Lightning Lane to standby was not, optimal. And so it ended up where, we were with longer wait times than anticipated. So, I've been kind of giving it a little bit of a wait and see, but, we're getting to that point where I'm ready to start truly evaluating the dynamics of what the product is in comparison to what it's been in the past.
Well, and one thing Disney probably has insight to that I don't is how much of this is natural demand and how much of this is pent up demand. Is there still pent up demand? I don't know. And it's almost, I was talking to someone that was working at the Jim Henson Studios, and which isn't relevant to the story, so I don't know why I share that. But she was just talking, but engaged in entertainment, right? And she's like, instead of buying a magic key, I'm going to go a couple times a year. And that's exactly what Disney wants to happen, because, that's a way to naturalize demand. And they're probably, when they go those 4 times, is going to spend more each of those 4 times because they're not there every day. So they're not buying, there's new merchandise, new food that they want to try. So they're going to be a more high revenue guest than otherwise. So, I think we all have concerns about what this means for the future of Disney fandom and long-term impacts on the business. But all those things that we think as fans might happen haven't happened yet. So those things kind of need to happen before Disney's going to learn the lesson. Until you break it, you don't know how far you can push something. That's what, when a picture I used to say, it's like, when you're designing something, you don't know how far you can push it until you realize it's too much, and then you go back. Well, I think that's what Disney's going to need to with the park, situation, is they're going to keep pushing until it breaks and then take a step back.
Yeah. And like Gio points out, we've also got the international, initially we would have had a domestic pent up. Now we're seeing that international pent up. making its way. And then to some extent, it's going to take a little bit for people to even just be more comfortable, just with travel in general. So,
That's a
while you
great
had some people kind of chomping at the bit to go, well, now you have people who are beginning to kind of wade back into that normalcy, and they're now going to go. So it's going to be. I'm very interested to see how long it takes for the demand to truly settle out into kind of a more normalized, and how Disney will handle all of it.
And that's a great point. I mean, Gio has a great point. I mean, especially Disney World, it was 20% of guests. I mean, that's that. You were more recently at Walt Disney World, but I just looking at wait times. It's not. I mean, it wouldn't be bad for 4th of July, but for October 26th, it's busy.
Yeah,
it's very popular, as we were told to say. And I just really hope. And maybe now's not the time they can announce anything, because there's when they're doing these Wall Street Journal things, they got to be very careful to not violate some SEC provision of announcing something that hasn't been approved by the board or what have you. But I really hope that major expansion projects beyond what's happening at Epcot will be announced soon. I mean, they've teased some things that D23 is being under consideration, but those things need to happen in order to get pricing to normalize, in order to get attendance to normalize. I think we all want the solution to be more Disney, not more pricing or more gas.
For sure. For sure. Let's see. I guess as we wrap it up, we can talk about his beard, because we learned that his beard was inspired by his wife, that he would grow one on vacation, and his wife would try and convince him not to get rid of it, and he would get rid of it. And now he's finally given in to his wife and daughters, and he has kept the beard.
Do you buy that story?
A little bit. I a little bit.
Because there was a report that the new chief comm person convinced him to keep it, and that was the phrase where it was like, oh, well, this beard, did someone from communications tell you to do it? And no, it was my wife. It almost felt like, I can't tell you that my communications person told me to keep my beard. So I'm not saying his wife doesn't like it, but I don't know if that was truly the deciding factor.
I feel like it's one of those things where maybe he wasn't sure that within the corporate whatever it was okay, but finally the corporate was okay. So since his wife liked it, and he really wanted to do it, but he had that kind of holding him back, and then he finally got the final kind of clearance, as it were. But I like the story. I wish he'd smile more. Near the end of the interview, he started smiling much more as he was talking about his wife, as he was talking about his daughters. And I just was like, oh, I want this Chapek more. I want smiley Chapek more. And I get it, because I lean a bit introvert as well. And so, I can understand and empathize with that. But yeah, oh man, those moments when he was smiling, I was like, okay, this is the Parks and Resorts hospitality element that I appreciate about Disney. So what is Kyle saying here, Ben?
It's an Iron Man reference.
Okay.
Oh, Obadiah Stane. Okay, so Obadiah Stane, the villain from Iron Man, who Bob Chapek kind of looks like with the beard, is the villain of, and he uses this quote where he says, Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave when, with a box of scraps, when getting frustrated that the guy from Christmas Story couldn't build a new Iron Man suit.
I had a teacher in university who would talk about how he had resting dolphin face. And so people just thought of him as being a very pleasant individual, because he always dolphins always have kind of a natural smile. Yeah. And so he felt like sometimes people didn't take him as seriously as they should, because he just kind of always looked like he was in a very jovial mood. And I sometimes feel like Chapek kind of suffers from the other, resting villain face. So, I feel it's one of those things. I feel for him.
So I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on our site over the next bit. You'll be back in about 45 minutes.
Woohoo!
For Daily Necessities. And then Marvel will be streaming the Black Panther premiere. We will be back after that at some point to go through the social reaction and talk a little bit about what happened tonight. I will say too, also, it's Muppets night on The Masked Singer. So Mike is going to have a full recap of that after it airs. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it does.
I don't watch The Masked Singer. but I would watch them up at night. I did watch the episode where Kermit was like inside something. And then tomorrow's a busy day. So tomorrow morning, Eden, friend of the site, is going to be at a Disney 100 launch event in the UK, in London. So we'll have coverage of that thanks to her. So thank you, Eden, if you're watching. Edith. Then also we've got after that, Hasbro will be doing a special stream. So Mike will be covering that for us. And then at 5:00, we'll hear with Mike and Bill for Who's the Boss Live. And then late at night, we will have Mike and myself will be doing a late night edition of Marvel Time, where he will share his initial reactions of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
Very cool. And currently on the site, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, Mike Celestino's offered up a bunch of recaps regarding the Star Wars Tales of the Jedi that debuted on Disney Plus. So those have been published on Laughing Place. There's a Star Wars play tent. I don't know if you saw this, Ben, but it's a Millennium Falcon. I'm sure we're going to talk about it on Barely Necessities, but can't fail to mention it here too, because, oh man, I would have given so much for this when I was a kid. So.
And then we will be back on Tuesday, probably. Tomorrow's too busy. Friday and Monday, we're Halloween. So probably back with another Inside LP on the 1st as we officially go from spooky to merry.
Woohoo!
We're just like merry. That. Just like holiday services at Disneyland. We just do it.
I prefer gingerbread to pumpkin spice. I prefer garland
like pumpkin spice gingerbread. Is that a thing?
It probably is, but I prefer just my gingerbread, straight gingerbread. So there we go.
So anyway, well, thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, it was fun.
We'll see you all very soon. You'll see people sooner than me, but we'll see you later.
Yep. Thanks for watching.